Good evening. Could you please introduce yourself shortly and the context that you're working in?
Good evening. My name is Magdalena Sepúlveda. I'm a Chilean lawyer, and I'm the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and Extreme Poverty.
We have heard many stories and many initiatives explained or expressed today during this day of the conference, and we found out that the work done in poverty reduction and fighting precariousness and exclusion is so vast, and it can be quite difficult to grasp everything. What are some elements that stood out for you during this discussion, and where do you see the role of the state playing in this?
Well, I think that it's very important to stress actually the role of the states and to understand that poverty is created or exacerbated or maintained by policies that come from very powerful actors, being the states or other economic powerful actors. Therefore, it is important to hold them accountable for the fights against poverty and to see that the fight against poverty is an obligation for the states, that is not charity, and that people living in poverty are actually entitled to receive some benefits from the states, and they must be seen as agents of change, as important actors in this fight against poverty.
Do you see in the global fight for more just societies, do you see people mobilizing and submitting law cases against their own state? And or do you see actually the states waking up and taking some of the banks responsible for the crisis to the justice?
I think that there has been a lot of mobilization and social unrest to some extent against certain public policies that have been taken. If we look at in Europe, the austerity measures, these very severe fiscal cuts that are exacerbating poverty and pushing a lot of people into poverty. So there's been this social movement. Unfortunately, there is still a huge accountability gap. I think that the states have been implementing austerity measures without following the democratic process. They are implementing these measures without consulting people, without having a public debate. They're presenting these measures actually if they were unavoidable, as if they were really compelled to do it, and if there's no options. However, I think that it is important to stress and it's important to mobilize people to raise their voice against the states in order to stress that there are certain obligations for states in regard, for example, to their human rights obligations, in regard to their good governance, that they need to respect when they implement this type of policies. So I think that there is like three different steps in which we see how human rights are not being respected when these policies have been implemented, and in which states are not being accountable, and we need to press for more accountability. First is the process by which these policies have been implemented. Several European states argue that they've been forced to do it by the Troika, by the International Monetary Funds, by the European Central Bank and the IMF. But actually, even if these measures have been imposed by these institutions, the states have several obligations to respect the rights of those most vulnerable, and they cannot just take measures that undermine people's rights. So there is the process by which this policy has been implemented is very problematic. then the impact of these policies in terms of how this type of policies are really violating the rights of people living in poverty. If we think, for example, on how the dismantle of social protection mechanisms that they have been so important to keep people out of poverty in European countries. Now, without consultation, without following these democratic processes and implementing these policies as if they were unavoidable, we've seen that there is the disappearance or the erosion of social protection system, that it's very problematic. But the same happened with the disproportionate impact that this measure have on people living in poverty. And this is also something that we need to raise our voice. Not everybody is suffering the impact of the austerity measures in the same level. Those who were already living in poverty are suffering disproportionately, and some vulnerable groups like persons with disabilities, women, older persons are suffering disproportionately. And the problem is not only the impact of one measure. So it's for example, not only the cuts on unemployment benefits, but if you look at a single mother, for example, the accumulative impact of the cuts on child benefits, the cut on single parents benefits that are happening at the same time that there is less childcare facilities because there have been cuts in the public services, so there is less childcare facilities in which she probably has less protection in her housing. So this accumulative impact, it is so dramatic, and we have to do something about it. From a rights perspective, the principles of equality and non-discrimination require to protect that people will not suffer a disproportionate impact of certain measures, and we need to raise the voice against that. And the other level in which the rights have been violated is that the states are in several, even in Europe and elsewhere, there's been a lot of repression against social movements. So again, the rights of those who are against these measures are violated when they express their views against the system. So in my view, there is a whole range of violation of rights that are occurring in the process of implementing this policy measures that for which a state must be accountable for. And there are mechanisms, and this mechanism needs to be used. And people, we have to raise awareness on the fact that there is the link between austerity cuts, poverty, and violations of rights.
Thank you very much. And last issue I wanted to know your opinion about. The state sovereignty and the nation state as we know it today, we can expect that it will be around for decades to come. But we also see issues of regionalization and autonomy growing up or spurring or growing in different places around the globe and in Europe as well. How do you see the future of state sovereignty and the nation state in the context of this crisis, and how do you see it evolving in the future?
I think that the state have given up a lot of sovereignty when they engage, for example, in international treaties, being European integration, for example, or in regards to human rights treaties. State, when they are party, when they voluntarily assume obligations in regard to human rights treaties, they're giving up a little bit of their sovereignty because they're allowing that an external body, for example, the European Court of Human Rights, will monitor and assess whether or not they're in compliance with these treaty obligations in regard to human rights. And that is extremely important. And I think that we cannot go back to this idea that there is this kind of very protected issue, and whatever states do with their national is an internal issue that cannot be monitored. When the states violates the rights of people, it is everybody's concern, and there are mechanisms to address the situation through their obligations, the same obligations that the state have assumed by being party of international human rights treaties.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it.